Sometimes, when a story idea hits, the unfolding narrative comes rushing from the fingers, fully formed and lustrous and full of magnum opus energy. You just know this story is the one that's going to make a difference. This is the one that'll get picked up. This is the one people will talk about. Except when you step back and reread the fruits of such chaotic laboring, you find that the resultant story on paper doesn't match your original vision, and instead is but a mere caricature of what you saw when the story first landed in your gray matter. There are lots of reasons why a penned story may not match the vision you had before you sat down to write. Some of those reasons are valid and manageable through thoughtful revisions. Others, however, may be little more than the emotional manifestation of perfectionist anxiety. So let's talk through that vision execution mismatch to decide whether there's truly a mismatch or whether there's something more unique at play. When I was in college, I took a few drawing courses to complete my fine arts credits requirements. And let me tell you, there's a reason I didn't save my portfolio. You are subjected to my illustrations enough as it is, and probably don't need to see that wild found materials project I completed using used coffee grounds and ketchup anyway. But I digress. While in class, I was never satisfied with the pieces I made. I received high marks in all my art classes, but I could never be sure whether those high marks were given for the attempt or for the technical exactitude of execution. Hindsight tells me a different story. Sometimes something in my artwork really did go wonky. A malproportioned face, for example, still haunts me. Naturally, though, as is the way of the anxious millennial, I felt like I sucked and was getting A's for effort. But sometimes the wonkiness was me. My perception of what I'd done didn't match the reality of the work I'd produced, even when my work was really good. Suddenly, I found myself on an unexpected quest to figure out when the work was the problem and when I was the problem. And while I'm not totally certain this type of introspective quest will ever end, I managed to learn enough about technical execution to identify it when I saw it, which helped me identify my perception issues and navigate them with aplomb while building confidence. Today's writing advice: learn the difference between a wonky story and a wonky perception about your story. So let's get to it. Point of view, or the viewpoint perspective, is the perspective the narrator holds in relation to the events of the story. Your literary narrator may be a main character, a side character, a detached witness, or an opinionated know-it-all. Regardless, every story has a narrative POV. When written well, the POV from which your story is told immerses the reader in your world, provides a path for the reader to build an emotional connection to your characters and their circumstances, and provides a backdrop for the overall tone of your story. POV is both complex and simple. It was one of the first choices you made when you wrote your story, and likely happened when you wrote your first sentence. Sometimes the narrative POV is exactly right for the story. Sometimes it isn't. And if the POV is wrong, something will feel off, even if you've checked all the technical exactitude boxes. The omniscient POV works best when the character's collective experiences are more important than the experiences of any single character, for example. Understand the pros and cons of your chosen POV and how well matched it is to your story by grabbing either a copy of my booklet, Point of View, A Guide to Perspective in Fiction and Memoir, which is linked to you on the MetaStellar website, or by perusing my POV Deep Dive series here. Then make sure you're using the right POV to match the vision you have for your story. One of the most common bits of advice I've given to authors is to humanize their characters. Give them flaws, dreams, fears, desires. As I've shared before, and if you filled out character profile sheets or discarded them in sheer frustration, you know how little value the call to humanize your characters can actually be. Every author works a little differently, plans a little differently, and sometimes those prescriptive methods just don't work. Readers look for emotional connections to the story they read, and characters are poised to deliver those emotional connections when developed in a robust and well-rounded way. And robust and well-rounded characters are those who are recognizable in their dialogue, internal thought, action, appearances, and some creative interpretations. When your dialogue or internality is a little flat, or if the characters don't seem to act like real people act, help them become more human using dialogue, thought, and action. With exactly one exception that I can think of, every author I know of, or work with wants to write a page turner for their readers. And producing a page turner means understanding how to wield literary tension, the threat of something happening, whether good or bad, that results from the anticipation the reader has before their questions are answered, or not. And tension doesn't have to be gripping, edge of the seat danger. The anticipation you feel just before a first kiss, tension. The war being waged between your head and your heart, tension. The pounding heart when you're behind the curtain awaiting your cue, tension. So give your reader a reason to keep turning pages by ratcheting up the tension in your story. If you've made it all the way to this point, chances are your story issue has little to do with your point of view, your characters, or your page-turning tension. Instead, you may be battling unrecognized or unhealed perfectionism. This is the hardest aspect of story development and revision to discuss because the experience is personal and unique to each author. But I'm going to say it straight. Writing a magnum opus isn't a realistic goal. In fact, the greats who wrote their masterpieces often didn't even know how powerful their works were until someone else told them later. Beethoven could neither have predicted nor intentionally written into existence the power of Symphony No. 9 in D minor, and Herman Melville found success only posthumously. The reception of art can be hugely unpredictable. What seems like a sure thing may fizzle. What seems like a long shot may explode. You can do exactly 0 things to influence this. So don't. Instead, make sure your story is done and stop revising before you overdo it. When the story that ends up on your page doesn't match the vision you set out to capture, step back and ask yourself where the mismatch is. Do you have a POV problem? A character development problem? A tension problem? Or are you secretly battling intense feelings of perfectionism and beating yourself up before your story gets a chance to fly and reach people? The hidden secret? Maybe your vision wasn't quite right for your story anyway. Maybe what you ended up with, pokey bits and all, is the true art. Happy writing.